All right, folks, we're going to get started. So thank you for being with us. My name is Peter Brantley, and I'm at the University of California, and before that, many other places.
My name is Gary Price. I work for a lot of different people as a consultant, including Library Journal. I do a blog for them called InfoDocket, and I also do a daily newsletter for the Association of Research Libraries called Day in Review. Peter will come back. Oh, and this page that we're working from that has Peter's slide deck embedded in it is available at this page, or just take a picture of the QR code.
All right, so this is going to be a talk in two parts, in a way. This talk's genesis came about through conversations that Gary and I were having about the sudden proliferation of research studies and reports on AI in the scholarly communication space, and we thought it would be kind of catchy to do a talk on how to use AI to help understand the plethora of reports on AI. Over time, the talk has diverged a little bit from that, and so we hope that it will end up being a way for both us and for you to help understand the context in which AI is evolving fairly rapidly and how it's impacting scholarly communication and some of the ramifications and possibilities for decisions that we might want to make as a broader community, both libraries, publishers, as well as platforms moving forward. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the evolution in AI, some of the possible outcomes, a little bit more theoretical at times, and Gary's going to take an opportunity then to show some tools in practice and how some of the evolving nature of AI tools and agents impact the actual tools that you can use in scholarly communication today and how they might themselves evolve. Code of conduct, we've seen this. All right, an introduction to AI. All right, if you think about the history of AI tools just over the last couple of years, not going back into prehistory, there were really sort of an evolution from a simple utilization of AI, which was intended to enhance relatively simple discovery. So this was a better Google. This really leveraged the structure that many of us in our community have in our metadata to better derive results for individual users. It flattened the content landscape. You sort of erased distinctions between different kinds of content, enabling discovery of information that was often embedded in other containers. This often was really, really helpful, right? Being able to discover software or data embedded within journal articles, or try to discover research protocols in and of themselves, or as another example, discover best practices in statistical methodology, or essentially queries that are poorly done in traditional search engines. But AI really provides a leg up on being able to discover assets like that. Over time, AI has really started to deliver a very different kind of outcome, which is a more type of synthetic analysis. AI, because of its nature, has accumulated linkages between disparate nodes of knowledge, is able to form linkages between those nodes, even when those nodes are seemingly disconnected by quite some distance in domains or other aspects that traditional science or traditional inquiry would otherwise impute. So AI does deliver a kind of extra-human capability in that sense that is really yielding some novel research discoveries. And it's definitely one of the things we need to be thankful for AI. But that kind of synthetic apparatus also has a wide range of ramifications. Gathering content from across a wide diversity of sources really diminishes the prima facie value of the source itself. So we're really moving into a world where the medium is not the message, right? We're losing the context of where the information is coming from. And so the information source has a different sort of purpose to fill. Articles become data elements, journals become data stores that are addressable by the machines, and platforms themselves are query targets for AI machines, right? Machines running AIs. And this is a very different kind of operating understanding of how the web would work than the way it arose. And indeed, just even earlier today in a post in a Substack blog that Tim O'Reilly and colleagues produce, they made this observation, which is at the core of that. The blog post has to deal with the rapid activity that bots have impacted our world, which we've discussed it many times during this conference. It's such a contemporary issue. And Tim and his colleagues wrote, protocols like HTTP, or is the underlying protocol of the web, were built on principles of trust, collaboration, and even anonymity, designed for an internet where sharing information was the primary goal. It was never intended to facilitate secure, automated, machine-to-machine data exchange on a global scale. And yet that is what we're looking at right now. So with this new machine-based focus and information retrieval, there's a battle for control over the user's attention. And if you think about the contest between an AI agent and what it is pursuing, and perhaps us as a community as sources of content and data, AI agents are taking the content and delivering it to the user in the context of a wide range of other material. So we have to ask this fundamental question of what now is the value of publishing as a practice? Because the original intent of publishing was to get information into the hands of human users, and now increasingly removing information into the hands of machines. So in the future, as we think about people working, our researchers, our scholars, working with information, what becomes their new home? As Wiley and Relax, Elsevier, and other players in the commercial market in our world try to surface engines that include AI capabilities, does that become the researcher's home? Or does the centrality of Anthropic, Claude, and OpenAI and its suite of tools, is that the new workbench for our community? And in all of this, does any of it benefit the author or the creator in the way and the traditions that we have traditionally wanted to provide them with Accord? So if you're hosting or publishing content, are you able to provide new value for your users in a world where AIs are moving information from one service to another? And if your content is provided somewhere else, what are the risks you are facing in losing that relationship? So it's a question of the value of the data versus the transaction itself. Benedict Evans, who's a tech commentary individual and consultant, recently said, pithily, how much do you want to trade control for distribution? And this is really a question for publishers and for libraries. This is really a little bit of a loss of information history in a way. Scholarly communication benefits from its tradition, the history of scholarship, but increasingly that stands to risk being lost. An AI agent doesn't know the history of a particular domain of scholarship and can't place information in a human landscape. So what are the new mechanics of discovery for AIs? And here I want to talk a little bit about how AIs actually pull information from sources. And there are two main ways that AIs are leveraging pools of content right now. The one that we've been most familiar with over the last year is called RAG. And it's a way of querying the web, in essence, of improving context for a user's query or user's interaction with an AI for functions within the language model itself. It provides for diversification of sources on the web, and it provides for contemporary value or contemporary context because it's pulling in, or can pull in, contemporary sources on the web. But there's a new way, increasingly, that people are creating interfaces to pools of information, and that's something called Model Context Protocol, or MCP. And if you're not familiar with that acronym, you will be soon, because MCP servers are becoming increasingly predominant among large content providers. Without going into too many technical details, MCP provides for a set of tools, services, and resources that enable the integration of content and AI services. They allow for the incorporation of specialized knowledge sources, such as those that we might provide, and special collections, or if you're a publisher, and the publications that you provide access to.
A good example of that, you might have heard about at this show, is from a major publisher, from a large, is the Wiley Gateway. They're utilizing MCP to connect different tools to the end user.
Absolutely. And another example, hypothetically, might be the Internet Archive could stand up an MCP server against the TV News Archive. And an individual could query the TV News Archive with a range of far more sophisticated queries than would be possible with a traditional RAG or Google search type agent. So MCP is a way of bringing in data from a source into an internal AI dialogue. MCP can manage queries in part through its design and through the use of APIs. Some people might want to assert that MCP is simply a wrapper around APIs. In some ways that's the case, in some ways not so much. But a provider of content, again, like a library or a publisher, can customize APIs oriented toward MCP access so to provide more structured access to their information. And API endpoints can provide some access control against LMs that would otherwise have carte blanche to that information. So it's a more easily securable path for data exchange and collaboration. MCP is extraordinarily trendy right now, and it's growing very, very fast. So you will see it soon. But MCP is not a very complex protocol. In many ways, it's incompletely specified. It leaves out a lot of transaction logic. So for example, there's no layer within MCP to provide an explicit pass-through for authentication or authorization information.
I just want to say, too, the history of MCP does not go back that far. It was introduced, I believe, last December, somewhere around there, maybe a year ago, and it comes from Anthropic. It was originally, it continues to be developed by Anthropic.
Yeah.
Now there is another one, there's another protocol called agent to agent, what's called a competing protocol, and that is Google's play into this, to this space.
Yes. And MCP has so far been fairly overwhelming in mind share. There are a lot of tools for reducing MCP servers and hosts and clients. And increasingly, one of the things that's really interesting in the AI landscape is that we're beginning to see the AI vendors come up with their own browser agents, right? So Comet from Perplexity, Atlas from ChatGPT are browsers that embed the AI functionality within them. So to the user, it looks as if you're interacting natively with an AI agent from within the browser. But you could also design your own, as if you're a service provider or a publisher, you could also, in theory, design your own browser extension or your own layer that will plug into a browser to provide some of the same functionality. What's important about this is that if those browsers run against servers like MCP, if the user can gain access to the content from within the browser, so can the AI, right? Once it's in the browser, the AI has access to it. So essentially, without careful attention to how you structure the release of information, there's a very simple way for AI through the browser to gain access to that information, whether it's licensed or content protected, it doesn't matter. Once it's in that user agent, it's available for the AI. So this has a lot of ramifications ultimately for the design of APIs. Now, through the use of AIs, whether they're utilizing RAGs or MCP, what we're doing is we're creating a lot of new data for those AI models. And this is a concern for us because we are potentially giving over a lot of useful business data to corporations that are relatively novel to us. So research queries, user or lab profile information that gets built up over time as our researchers or labs start interacting with AIs. That information can start to be aggregated at the department, college, or institution level, and potentially that data can be cycled back to the institution to provide additional context for the users, or it could be sold back to us, as many sources of information are historically cycled back to us as products. So as a community, and I'm speaking here again as a broad community, how can we work together to drive more toward beneficent outcomes? How can we start to think about enabling community control over the data that we're generating through our usage of AIs that are interacting as machines with the other machines that we're building to provide access, ostensibly to other users? So how can we think about providing more control over our data? How do we embed our own professional ethics into the usage of these assets? How do we provide for better privacy? And ultimately, whether it's open access or licensed, how do we provide better control over our own IP? And as publishers, how can we elaborate standards? How can we establish frameworks beyond elementary sitemaps for core rights, not just for simple harvest, but for use? And we've seen a myriad of uses start to emerge. And maybe this is an occasion where we can start to consider what it is about intellectual property that's really valuable in this community. Because if machines are talking to machines more often, and the content that we're producing as a library or publisher is not going to a human user, but to an agent, what does that mean for the value and the utility of that intellectual property? It's time for us to start discussing what it means to share our experiences in this world, and importantly, to start thinking about what an assessment of these new forms of value would look like. How do we measure the worth of an agent harvesting and analyzing a wide range of content on behalf of a researcher? This is not a user querying a single source through a web agent and then moving to another single source for a web agent. This is a very different kind of use. So if you're interested in measuring your ROI or an equivalent, how do you do that now? And so this is work that we need to start undertaking. And further, we need to think about new types of engagements technically that might further our own missions. So for example, there might be a way of pooling institutional data together, perhaps in an anonymized way, to create virtual data lakes. An example of this has arisen, I think most prominently in biomedicine or pharmaceutical data sharing, where if you're a pharmaceutical company doing a tremendous number of tests over potentially bioactive materials, you may find a list of things that you're interested in and a list of things that you're not. But if all companies doing clinical research share that data through an anonymized fashion, and that data is then available for query and analysis, you're raising everybody's boats. Your company may have not found a solution using that protein, but maybe I can. So it's additive knowledge. Is there a corresponding way of pooling our information using MCP servers, encouraging new forms of access? And similarly, when we use the example of IIIF to knit images together across our landscape, is there a way for us to generate new protocols so that we can move away from thinking as an institution apart from other institutions? How can we join assets together to form new ways of delivering value for our user communities? So these kinds of interinstitutional data and services might provide us new opportunities. So we can work to build for ourselves a richer information landscape if we put our work in that direction. So this is the time that we need to start asserting our interests, because we've seen this massive direction of time and money away from more traditional pursuits into very focused areas of engagement. And this rush to invest by AI firms yields outcomes which are as yet quite unclear. And there are obviously serious consequences in financial debts and liabilities, even for those of us who are trying to learn, experiment, and integrate AI support within our own products and services. We're losing already a lot of jobs, many of them in technology, but we're already seeing that happen in publishing, and I think beginning to see it in libraries, probably too quickly. Are we yielding too much of the future that we want to design to others? So with that, I want to provide Gary an opportunity to talk through what some of the agents in our community are trying to build that will enable us to work cleanly, but also cognizant of some of these difficulties that we've discussed. Gary.
I'm not going to do demos because it's already 4:20. But here we go. So for those of you who walked in later, after Peter began, all the resources I'm going to mention, I'm not going to run demos since we'd like to leave a few minutes for questions, and what time is it now? It's 4:20. So this is the webpage. Take your picture. Hello. And we'll get started. Peter's slides are also embedded on this page. So along with MCP, and let me skip to the end just to let you know that at the very bottom of this page are two documents, which is not loading at the moment, I'll check that, but two documents, including one that was published today by Akamai, that give really good overviews and definitions to what MCP, Model Context Protocol, is. So those are included on the page as well. How many of you are familiar with an organization in Seattle called the Allen Artificial Intelligence Group? One or two. They're doing really exciting work. And it's also open, which is, I think, very important. So what I simply want to point out to you is what they recently rebranded as ASTA. And these are two, and soon to be, as you can see here, coming soon, AI discovery and research tools. The first one is called Find Papers. And Find Papers is just like it said, it leverages a tool that you probably are already familiar with from the Allen Group, AI2, is Semantic Scholar, a tool that's been around now, I believe, for 15 years. It's an incredible, open, free, however you want to call it, database of academic material, academic published papers and preprints. So this leverages that database to basically find me 5 papers about this, this, and this. It uses their own models, Olama, I believe, or is it something like that? Can't remember the name. And then it will go to Semantic Scholar to discover those papers. So it's, I think especially now with budgets becoming, they have always been, but even more now, I think it's also very important to be leveraging the open and free resources, because I think Peter would agree that a lot of times a lot of great open tools have not survived is because people don't even know that they exist in the first place. So that's the ASTA Find Papers. Then there's another one, another tool that generates a report. This dives into the papers and will basically, it looks like a ChatGPT or a Claude, leveraging the actual papers to respond to you with a complete nice paragraph, so on and so forth, based on your prompt. So both, it's a discovery tool to find papers and go to the citation. And it's another tool there to generate a report to actually get a narrative based on those actual articles. And then as you can see, coming soon, they will have a tool that will allow the user to upload their data and use their models to use their open models to analyze their data. So those are the two now, soon to be 3 resources. What they just rebranded as ASTA or ASTA. I mentioned Semantic Scholar. That's there. I also want to mention a tool that they've been made available for the last few years called Semantic Reader, and we'll just quickly click on one of these. This actually goes into selected papers, ones that are open, that they have the full text access to. They'll actually mark up. I don't know if you can see the difference in the colors, the little tabs. So they're actually going to the paper level to mark them up with goals, methods, results. So that's using leveraging their AI to actually mark up a PDF for, as I said, goals, methods, and results. So that's another feature that they provide. And I think we're very likely going to see these types of tools, if we're not already seeing them, see them elsewhere, these types of technology. I also want to point out something else that they do, and I think they should be commended for this. I'm not sure that we're going to see this from others, and you can read this or watch the video, this is something they introduced back in April. So when you use their models to do your research, again, equivalent to a Claude or a ChatGPT, they have a feature called OMO, which is what I was trying to think of a moment ago, OMO Trace, that allows the user to actually see the training data that that fact or statement is based on. So they actually make the training data available to the end users at the time that they're producing that result. The quality, all of that is one thing, but I think they should be commended for being this transparent with what they're doing. I'm not a betting man, but I'm going to bet that we're not going to see this type of transparency from a lot of the big guys over the next few years for a bunch of obvious reasons. Another great open piece of infrastructure that doesn't have AI right now is called lens.org, which if you're not familiar with Lens, I highly encourage you to take a look at that. Again, so now we have OpenAlex, which is a tool that I just adore. I think Jason and his team should be commended. They just relaunched the database they rewrote the entire code base, and they just relaunched it in the last 2 weeks. I also have to say, again, that's not loading correctly, but I am a huge user. So when I do my info docket site and I do ARL Day in Review, I really like to include new journal articles and/or preprints. I think one thing, and we could do an entire session on this, I think as a way to stay current with users, either in terms of just delivering it to them via email or teaching them how to do it on their own, email alerts are very, very useful. And the free alerting service from OpenAlex is absolutely remarkable. In some cases, I am seeing articles and or preprints within 24 to 72 hours of the time they actually are published, and they're hitting the Springer Nature or the Archive or whatever database. They are actually ending up in my inbox with a direct link to it. And of course, this concept is nothing new, but the fact that it's from open infrastructure like OpenAlex and it's available free to anyone is a really, really impressive thing that they're doing. Peter just talked about MCP. I agree with him 1,000%. We spend at least once a month on Friday talking about how really cool MCP is. And I also want to mention, in addition to what Peter said, that it is from the end user perspective, it makes it so easy, in my opinion, to the end user. Basically, think of it as a USB cable. You just plug it in and go. So if there is a connector that Peter mentioned, you develop a connector, you just move a lever over, for example, on the Claude interface, and now you're actually interacting with that unique data set that the MCP connector has connected you with. So we all know how important ease of use is, and MCP can make ease of use very, very easy. I also want to say, so back to OpenAlex. At the moment, there are no quote-unquote official OpenAlex connectors to an MCP. However, there on the page here, I've linked to 2 unofficial connectors. So now, one or the other, you go through the process of connecting them to, for example, Claude. It's relatively easy, and I'll get to that in a moment. And now you can ask Claude, hey Claude, use the OpenAlex MCP and do this, this, and this with the type of data that's in there. Find me 5 articles about this. It finds the articles. If the full text is available, you can prompt it that way. So it's connecting, again, whether it be Anthropic or whatever AI, to the specific data set, and in this case, by just moving a lever from left to right. It has the potential to make it that simple. And again, instead of searching and building and going out everywhere on the web, the end user gives it a lot more context to the specific information that probably will give them the best result. There's less chance for things, quote unquote, to go wrong. Of course they will, but again, it's using a very specific reference book instead of going to the entire encyclopedia. And in terms of And by the way, so now the page includes other open tools. Now, a lot of these at this point don't have MCPs, but I want to tell you a personal story in the sense that I am the least bit of a developer. I have aspired over the years to become a developer, to write the code, but I'm not one. However, I have now also jumped a little bit into the vibe coding age. By the way, vibe coding was the Collins Dictionary Word of the Year. It was announced this morning. So and I use a tool, and as you know, there are many different vibe coding tools, including just the free version of ChatGPT. However, I use a tool called Warp. I pay like $20 a month for that. And with Warp, recently, Peter mentioned the Internet Archive. Well, there's another database that the Internet Archive has a relationship with called GDELT. It's this massive global database of news. What I was able to do within basically a half an hour is grab the GDELT API documentation, paste that URL into Warp, and say, code an MCP connector from GDELT to code a GDELT MCP connector. Within 20 minutes, it was up and running and working really, really well. While we're excited about MCP2, especially with Peter, both of us are very interested and very passionate about internet privacy. There are a lot of issues, as Peter said. We're really at the beginning stages here, and there are privacy issues here, like technology, like this type of technology. We hope that it will get better. Basically any tool at this point that has a public API, and in some cases if you pay for the API, you get the code, you can now connect via MCP to whatever AI tool that you're using. In Claude, specifically the Claude OS X app makes it really, really simple to connect. So again, there's plenty to talk about. I will also have to say, specifically with open infrastructure, it's not a field of dreams. As I said a moment ago, there's so many cool tools over the last 15, 20 years, but they go away because they're not sustainable, because in many cases it's because the people who would benefit from them the most are not even aware that they exist in the first place. So that goes into the whole marketing of what we do, but there are so many great tools out there, and I think things like OpenAlex and other open tools really deserve more attention, not only in our community, but that we go out and tell other people how valuable they can be, especially now in the age of decreasing budgets. So again, all of these resources and more are on this page. Go back up, you can take one more picture of it, and I think at this point, Peter, back to you.
Well, I think back to us. So we've tried to rush through a lot of information in a fairly condensed fashion. I just want to highlight one thing that Gary mentioned. So he was able to vibe code his own MCP connector, basically his own MCP server, because the site that he was targeting for MCP services publishes their API specifications on the web with documentation. So it's easy with that information to stand up your own MCP connector. Now, if a company didn't advertise their APIs or didn't make available documentation around their APIs, that construction would be more difficult. So it's a really interesting contest right now. A contest might not be the right way of looking at it, but there's a tension there. As a university or a company, you may want to have some control over access, or you may not. So as MCP evolves and as this landscape evolves for new and more powerful ways of engaging in dynamic querying and integration of content across sources into an AI analytics engine, there are going to be a set of determinations that we all have to make about what we want to permit and what we want to restrict or manage. So with that last
5 minutes.
lagniappe, then we'd love questions.